All right, welcome everybody to is it week 22? Week 23. I should figure that I should know this. Welcome to either week 22 or week 23. I don't have it pulled up in front of me, but
23.
23, we're moving along. It's going too fast. I'm so excited to be here today to talk about the Doolittle Raid, talk about the Battle of the Coral Sea, leading up to the morning of, or I guess the beginning of the Battle of Midway, which is the turning point for how things are going in the European or in the Pacific theater. So, up to this point, Japan has just expanded its influence, expanded its territory. They've taken over all sorts of islands on the Pacific, and the Kirubutai is just a force that they have not been able to stop yet. And so, this is going, the discussion today is going to take us up to the Battle of Midway, where we start gaining the upper hand and start pushing back and start winning. And so this is an exciting point in the battle. Lessons learned. I want to talk about the Doolittle Raid. Let me actually just share my screen and I'll give you the rundown of the agenda today. Is my screen sharing? Excellent. Great. So we will start off, as we do, with some of my thoughts about the things that we've read, some discussion that I have questions for you, things I want to talk about. And then we'll get into our favorite things, talk about the things that you guys loved. I don't know why I keep yawning. I'm not tired. I think that in my head, I'm thinking about don't yawn, which is causing me to yawn. So my apologies if I keep doing that. I'm not sure. I think it's like psychological yawns, but um, anyway, sorry about that. My thoughts. So we'll talk about the Doolittle Raid, and I want to ask you guys if it was worth it. There are a lot of pros. There are some cons, pretty that weigh heavily on either side, and I want to have a discussion about was the Doolittle Raid worth it in the end. We'll talk about the Battle of the Coral Sea, lessons that we learned, things that might help us approach or help the U.S. and I mean, conversely, the Japanese approach the Battle of Midway as they prepare for that. Things that they learned from the Battle of the Coral Sea that will help that. We'll talk about again a few of your favorite things. So for next week's homework, it's going to be a lot of reading. So I try to keep my homework at about 4 hours a week. So I schedule the readings to be based on that time frame. So I used Audible's, uh, the book on tape or the Audible audio book. And I set it at 1.0 speed and sort of use that to guide how much we read. This week, it's going to be slightly over 4 hours for the four chapters that we'll be reading, chapter 9, 10, 11, and 12. And so I will not assign supplemental homework, supplemental content. Some of you have already said that you've read ahead. And so I might have some supplemental content for you to watch, just in case you've already read ahead to give you something to sort of think about and to feed that curiosity. There it is again, another yawn. And so with the supplemental content this week, it will be extra. If I post something, it's extra. Don't feel like you have to do it. If you're following along and you're sort of keeping up with everything and you don't have time to get to the supplemental content, go ahead and jump in there and click that you've done it or whatever it is that, as you visit the page and exit from the page. I think the Mighty Networks is keeping track of that. I don't know if you click something and say you've completed it, but if you're doing that, feel free to click it as complete, even if you haven't done it. So I'll just assign it as supplemental content and it will be optional for the week. Just focus on the reading and getting that done. But it starts to get exciting. The reading really starts to get, for me at least, it starts to pick up speed where I don't want to put it down. I'm thinking about it when I'm like anxious to get to the next time that I can go for a walk. A lot of times I listen to the audiobook while I'm taking a break from work, and sometimes I look for reasons to take a break from work to get back to the book. It's one of those times where the story starts moving along. There's a lot of moving pieces. We start finding out what's happening at dawn, at 9 a.m., at 8:30 a.m., what's going on with the Japanese fleet, then what are the Americans doing? And it really starts picking up speed. So it's quick, it's easy reading, and it's easy to get kind of sucked into the story, I guess, where it's just you want to just keep going. So I think that the 4 hours of reading this week will fly by for you. It did for me, at least. So I want to first start out with the Doolittle raid. So as you know, there were 16 Army B-25 bombers that they were able to figure out a way, or I guess maybe they didn't figure out a way, but they figured out that it was possible to take off, to fly a B-25 by taking off of an aircraft carrier. It was led by Jimmy Doolittle, which, as you guys read about and learned about, he was sort of like the LeBron James of flying at that time, superhero. And so he is going around and yeah, Tucson, go ahead.
The bombers that they used, they're supposed to take off of at least, I want to say, either 1,000 feet or 10,000 feet, going 100 miles an hour. And off these aircraft carriers, they were only going about 50 miles an hour, and it was only about 500 feet.
Yeah.
And they were filled with gas, lots of it.
Yeah, right. And they would turn to go into the wind, and the day that they ended up taking off, they had a pretty strong wind that they're going into. So even though they're traveling slower, I guess the wind speed coming at them helped them get the speed they needed or enough wind to lift off of the plane. Pretty remarkable and a crazy feat, right? Like, I mean, Jimmy Doolittle, like I was saying, he's like the LeBron James or the Michael Jordan or the whoever sports person that you love the most. He's that person. And he goes to these group of pilots and says, I'm doing this mission, who's in? And doesn't tell them what they're doing or why they're doing it. It's all confidential still at this point. They don't even know yet that they're going to be taking off, flying their B-25s off of an aircraft carrier. But what do you do when you're like a basketball player and LeBron James comes to you and says, do you want to play with me? Do you want to be on my team? Like, well, yeah, of course, right? Like I wouldn't turn that down. And I think that as these heroes, I'll call them the pilots, started to understand their task, I think it was exciting and nervous and really a neat opportunity for them to take part in this dual raid. So we have this happening first time ever that's happened before with B-25s taking off from an aircraft carrier, like Tucson was saying, something that, on paper shouldn't be possible because of how fast they need to be going, how far their runways typically are, and it's much farther than the space they have on an aircraft carrier. So there's a lot going against them, but they figure out that it is possible. And this Jimmy Doolittle is well known for pushing the limits of of planes, and has speed records and distance records and things like that. And so, as you know, the planes take off. They are spotted early on in the morning, or not just in the morning, but before they were expecting to be spotted, and so they have to take off so that they can get to Tokyo before they can plan for their to plan to defend the city from an aircraft carrier and the bombers. And so they have to leave a little bit early. They don't have the amount of gas that they are going to need to make it to China, to the different places where they should safely land. And it turns out that by taking off early, it was a good thing, because even though Tokyo knew that they were coming, they didn't expect that they would be able to get to them. And so they had not yet fully prepared and had not warned the people, because they still thought they had more time before they could get close enough to launch these planes. They weren't expecting B-25s. They were expecting the normal planes that have a much smaller flight radius, gasoline, and all of those things that go into it. So they bombed Tokyo. There is not a lot of damage, except the morale is boosted for the Americans. And for the Japanese, they realize, oh no, the Americans actually do have courage that we didn't think they had. They do have the creativity and the ingenuity to do this. And they're a little bit nervous now that maybe their mainland, their homeland is not quite as untouchable as they thought. Um, and so we'll go to the two comments, and then I'm going to ask the question. So, what are the pros and cons of the Doolittle raid? So we'll say, what's the Doolittle raid worth? The pros and cons. Justice, go ahead.
I'd say honestly, it's really good training also for the Americans, but it also, affected the Japanese because, like, oh wait, we're not invincible, for getting hit by bombs by Americans. So that's what I think.
Yeah, yeah, great training, right? I mean, training in the fact that they were doing something new that they hadn't done before, and now they had this ability and knowledge. And yeah, it totally changed, like Justice was saying, it totally changed the mindset that they were touchable. They were no longer untouchable in their minds, that Tokyo could be reached, which is crazy because I wouldn't have thought it was possible either. So I don't blame them. Mason, go ahead.
You were talking about it earlier. One of the pros was that it was a big morale boost for America it was their revenge after getting hit at Pearl Harbor. One of the cons though is that for a lot of the pilots, because they had to take off early, they thought it was going to be a suicide mission. Some of them ended up surviving, or a lot of them did, but they still lost some good pilots.
Yeah. Tell us more about the morale boost. That was your comment too in the favorite things. How did it boost the morale, and what kind of effect did that have on the military, on the nation? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, a lot of Americans wanted revenge for what the Japanese did at Pearl Harbor because they always thought that they were untouchable because there's an ocean all around them to protect them. So when they got hit, it was a big hit on morale. Um, so when they got back, it was revenge. All the people were like, "Yes, we got Japan, and we can hit them. They're not invincible like we thought before we had a victory against them." That was massive. And for Japan, like you were saying, they got hit, and they had the same mindset as America. They thought they were untouchable, and they realized, oh no, because the Americans can hit us, are we in danger? Maybe they were second guessing their decision to hit the Americans at Pearl Harbor.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you hit it spot on. And in America, what they start having to do, and we've talked about it before, we'll talk about it a lot in the future too. They are selling war bonds, right? I think we even talked about Captain America. And it's interesting, the American public, when we have something like the Doolittle raid, something that's boosting morale, everybody's a little bit more willing to pitch in, a little bit more willing to help. So people are starting to buy more war bonds. It's starting to really get the American manufacturing machine going because suddenly we have something to rally around. I mean, we kind of saw, I mean, Americans are awesome, right? And we like this last weekend. I don't know if any of you are hockey fans, but the Americans won the gold medal in ice hockey for the first time since 1980. I'm a hockey fan. I'm a Boston Bruins fan, big time, and so I follow it. And so maybe my view of it is a little distorted because I was already following it and tracking hockey. But when we beat Canada, sorry if I don't know if any of us are Canadians, but when we beat Canada, hockey is like their thing, and we beat them, and it was just this really cool thing where suddenly a lot of the people who are posting normally about politics or things on social media are now cheering on America because of this gold medal in both men's and women's hockey. And so we are a great country about rallying together and showing pride in our country. And I think the Doolittle raid, I mean, on a much grander scale than just a hockey win, two hockey wins by the men's and the women's teams. But things we come together and that had this effect on America. They started getting more war bonds sold. The Americans were starting to feel more optimistic about our chances of winning in the Pacific and feeling more confident in just our ability to fight back, that we can take our bombs to Tokyo like they did to Hawaii. Yeah, it's just this incredible morale boost. And Mason also mentioned that when they were taking off, because they were so far away, it sort of became a suicide mission. I mean, there was hope, right, that they could live, and a lot of them did. Most of them did. Um, but as they're taking off, they're given an opportunity. Here is the situation. Here's what we're going up against. Here are the likely outcomes. You still want in. And these are some of the best pilots that were flying the B-25s for America at the time. They all said, yeah, let's do it. We got to do this. And so such a really cool story about heroics. You know, they knew the odds of living through this were very small, and still they went ahead and did it for the purpose of all the things that we're talking about. Such cool stories. Thank you, Mason, for bringing up those points. What else? What were some of the other pros and cons? So one pro, we got the morale boost. One con, a loss of American life, and so we lost those. I think all 16 of the B-25 bombers we lost. What else? Owen, go ahead.
Well, I'd like to address like both the pros and cons of this mission.
Sure.
Um, Tactically, it did not do anything. It was a failure. You lost 16 bombers, and none of the factories were significantly damaged. They were all repaired and kept running within like a day or two. Um, but strategically, overall, it was a huge boost for the Americans because now like we completed this mission and we got some payback from Pearl Harbor, even if it wasn't that impressive. But for the Japanese, this was like a huge humiliation. And uh you may not know this, but Japan is all about honor and prestige and like saving face. And so that was about the most humiliating thing ever. They were caught napping. A carrier was in their home waters and launched aircraft to bomb their capital city, and that would be a huge humiliation. And it caused them to build that defensive. And well, I read this book, and it said that part of the reason why they attacked New Guinea was to build that fortified defense line so that a Doolittle raid would never happen again. And um and it made them keep fighters back that they could have used at Midway and the Battle of the Coral Sea. Um, and like that would have been so humiliating for the Japanese. To the Japanese, there's nothing worse than being humiliated. And um, but I think for the Chinese though, uh, I don't think. Well, for them, they lost a ton of life trying to get these pilots out, and they didn't even get the bombers. And so I think the Chinese were the worst ones, got the worst end of the deal there. But I think the Doolittle raid helped America win Midway because it kept the fighters back and it made them rethink their plans, and it also pushed them towards this Midway engagement because they have to destroy those carriers or else that could happen again.
Yeah. Excellent points. Like all four or five that you made. I want to speak. Our book didn't talk a whole lot about what happened with China after this. But going into the Doolittle raid, that was something in other books that I've read about it. It is something that the Americans thought would be a likely outcome. That if the Chinese help us, the Japanese are already at war with them. They're probably going to take it out on the Chinese for helping us. But they still felt like it was something important for America's objectives. And so it was something that they said it's okay for us. I don't think that China was fully on board with it. But what happened in some of the places, so I mean, we in the supplemental content we learned about like where the soldiers gave their parachute to families, or they gave them like American coins, or they gave them buttons from their jacket, or they gave them different keepsakes, right? As a thank you for helping me. Thank you for giving me food. Thank you for helping me get to this point where I could get to this next point where I could be, shipped back to America and be safe. So they gave them some of those like keepsakes and tokens of appreciation in that. But those ended up being things that the Japanese found and punished villages, like would burn a whole village because they found a parachute there. And so there were things that just like these atrocities that occurred afterward because of the help that they rendered to the American fighters, the American bombers that had landed in their space and that they had helped. And so absolutely huge. I mean, we just like with Mason's comment, we talked about the loss of life of the Americans, but in China, historians say it could have been tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of Chinese people who were killed because of them helping these 16 B-25 bomber crews. I guess not all 16 landed in China, but just terrible things happened as a result. And so that is part of was it worth it? Did we really gain? What did we really gain from it? And did it outweigh that cost? I don't think there's a right answer. Because there's so many things at play. Like Owen was saying, because it was now something that they were concerned about, they pulled back some of their fighters, they pulled back some of their force and kept it closer to the mainland. And so when we get to Midway in our reading next week, the Kirubutai is a little smaller, and that's going to help. That's going to help a lot. Kohei just sent me a message. He said around 250,000 Chinese died. And for every member of the raid, that's 15,000, almost 16,000 people that died as a result. So because they were angry that the Chinese helped, they went in and they were more brutal than normal, I guess, for that. And so there are a lot of different pros and cons. So pros, again, I'll put them down here. They have the psychological impact. Harrison, I'll get to you in just a second. Psychological impact shattered the perception that their home islands were untouchable. You guys are catching my points. Strategic consequence, Japan redirected forces to protect their homeland. Owen just talked about that. And a proof of concept, I called it, but it demonstrated that the Americans had creativity. They had this coordination. They had this willingness to take bold risks, things that at the time were thought that we were just sort of, I mean, the Germans thought this too, that the Americans were just like pretty boys that don't actually want to fight. We just want to like be movie stars or something, right? But we actually have grit. We have determination. We're brave too. And so that proved to our opponents that we're gonna do this. We'll take these bold risks too. Harrison, go ahead.
This whole thing seems like the newspapers orchestrated this whole attack. It definitely was like, this is big, bold news in the U.S. I'd pick up a paper if it said, we'd attack Tokyo, especially at that time of the war. And it just feels like a very big publicity act. I also think it was kind of a test to see if we could even get close to Tokyo or in and around those islands without the Japanese knowing. And it was probably really helpful that the Japanese were arrogant enough to be like, there's no way that they're going to get this close. It definitely meant that we could attack one of their inner islands, one of their less protected ones, and get out. And I'm sure that was scary for the Japanese. It also, if the aircraft carrier had been found, we're down a massive aircraft carrier and a bunch of B-25s plus crew, and that's not good. So
Right.
I think it was a risk, and really we were lucky that nothing worse happened, even though bad stuff did happen. Um, yeah, it
Yeah,
was also like
absolutely.
a masterstroke too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's sort of taking a page out of Japanese playbook too, right? I mean, we were also arrogant in thinking that we were untouchable and Pearl Harbor happened. So I think it's sort of using a page out of their own playbook to go and do the same thing to them and catch them off guard like they did us. I mean, I think that theirs was much more successful in the fact that they were able to damage more equipment, more machinery, more boats, more everything. But the fact is that we could do it too. And I think
Yeah,
it's
they.
interesting. Oh, go
Sorry,
ahead.
you can go. I was just gonna say like Hawaii isn't their capital either. If they went into New York, that'd be an entire different thing. Um, so
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. And that's a great point. Um, and America's huge compared to Japan, so gigantic. But that is a good point, and that's something that the Americans became worried about after Pearl Harbor when they had these boats that could take off from like a submarine, for example, or to refuel from a submarine and then take off closer to the continent. So many things became a worry, and the Pearl Harbor attack created a lot of concern. And then us raiding Tokyo sort of took away a lot of that concern too, made everybody feel a little bit more confident, more comfortable, happy. And I wanted to go back also to Harrison's point about it being sort of a newspaper war. And it didn't, or a newspaper raid, it didn't just end there. The Japanese started publishing that the Americans were targeting school children, they were targeting hospitals, and they're using that to sort of rally their people to talk about how bad the Americans were. And if in other books they have the Americans on film as saying and admitting, I mean, in the face of torture, that yes, we were targeting this. We didn't care that there was a school next to this factory. Like, so they were doing these forced admissions to the Japanese public because they're being tortured, and so they had to say these things. And so that they just again going back to the newspapers and the whole idea of propaganda and using different messages to sort of rally the people. The Japanese were doing that after the fact too, saying that how bad the Americans were at targeting hospitals and schools, even though they clearly weren't. At least from our side, they clearly weren't. Braden just said, I mentioned that America is so much bigger than Japan. Braden said Japan is 1/25th the size of the U.S., about the size of California. So there you have it. We were attacking their capital. Our capital was probably unreachable by anyone at that time. So good points. Justice, go ahead.
I was looking into it. I'm pretty sure B-25s were only launched off an aircraft carrier once in World War II, and that was for the Doolittle raid.
Yeah,
So yeah, it's like kind of like one of those things that thinks like I think you know America could have like used it other times, I'm sure, but it would be like a crazy, just kind of a crazy risk. So I don't know. That's just one thing
yeah,
that was interesting. So yeah,
absolutely interesting and a great point. And I think strategically, it made sense in the Doolittle raid in the future. I mean, with the Battle of Midway happening that's the turning point of the Pacific theater. We start capturing back islands. We start getting closer and closer and closer. And then eventually we have additional planes that have longer distances, bigger fuel tanks that can bomb from further away. And so we eventually will start bombing Tokyo again, but it'll be land-based bombers that are taking off from land, flying, dropping their bombs, and then turning around and landing on land. And so, I mean, technology continues to improve, and longer flight times, longer flight distances benefit us. And as we take these different islands, getting closer and closer, we don't need to take off from aircraft carriers. But I guess there is still the idea that you could take the B-25s closer, and they could fly, drop their bomb loads, and get back to our own land. But I think at that point, we're doing it from land to land. So the other cons: human cost, several airmen, and we covered these. And then the Chinese, their reprisals in China were brutal, burning villages, torturing people. They were testing out the warfare where they would put diseases and sicknesses in their drinking water and things that would make them, this biological warfare, pretty nasty stuff. And then as limited military damage, like we were saying, and then the escalation risk that hardened the Japanese resolve, push their leaders to get more aggressive and actually push them into the scenario that we're going to start reading about at Midway. This bombing of Tokyo really increased their speed of preparing. Their Navy and their Army were not on the same page. They're fighting against each other, wanting to do different things. The Navy wanted to go do something like Midway. The Army was not supporting it. And then suddenly, with this Doolittle raid, the Army and the Navy are on the same page, and they're all in on going and taking Midway and trying to get back at us. So I guess the escalation risk is a con, but it also became a pro because it pushed them into this situation where we could have a decisive victory. So interesting. Thank you for that engaging discussion on the Doolittle raid. I think it's interesting to think about both sides. While these men were super heroic in doing this suicide mission where there was little chance that they could come back, and a lot of them did, thankfully, but they were just risking it all for this plan, this attack, this raid on Tokyo to get back, get a little bit of revenge from Pearl Harbor. So really incredible that they would do that. Next, I want to talk about the Battle of the Coral Sea. We'll go through this pretty quickly. So the Battle of the Coral Sea was the first naval battle, as you guys read, that was fought entirely by aircraft carriers up to this point, submarines, battleships, destroyers. It was sort of line up your ship against our ship and who has the best aim and the best armor. But that's changed now. The battleship era is over. Battleships are still important, but they are not the behemoth of a naval engagement like they used to be. Now it's aircraft carriers, and that sets the stage also for Midway, where we're just trying to get their aircraft carrier, they're trying to get ours, and who can do it first. Both sides relied in Coral Sea. They relied on aircraft to strike at long range. They both made some pretty crazy, I don't know if crazy, they just didn't have the technology and weren't making the right intuitive decisions, sending out their search planes in the wrong direction, thinking they were going to be in a place that they weren't. And there are some different, on both sides, some communication errors where the scout planes sent back messages saying that there are 2 aircraft carriers and 4 destroyers. Turns out there were 2 destroyers and 4 cruisers or something like that. So they sent all of their forces to attack aircraft carrier that wasn't an aircraft carrier. Things like that. Ultimately, the Japanese lost one of their aircraft carriers. We lost the Lexington after it had suffered a lot of damage. So Japan's invasion of Port Moresby was halted. So it was strategically a victory for the Allies, for the Americans and the Australians, but there were a lot of things that we learned, a lot of tactical losses, a lot of um, lessons that we really learned. So I wanted to ask you guys, what were, in your mind, some of the lessons that we learned from the Battle of the Coral Sea? Or how did this engagement change sort of the course of future battles, or how would it? Owen, go ahead.
So I'd like to share two things, and the first one is how many times they missed each other because of various things or being timid, and like I think we can apply that to our own lives, and like, are we gonna miss out on a decisive strike, an important thing, because we're too scared to take the risk and deploy our planes? Um, but my second thing is like I think this battle like really solidified the dominance of the aircraft carrier. Um, Lately I've been really into medieval history, especially the Hundred Years' War, and I was researching this one battle, the Battle of Agincourt, where where the English murdered, like, wiped out the French knights with just their longbows, and like that was the battle that like made the longbow the most dominant weapon in the medieval era. Um, and I think this battle was like that because in one battle, and I think also Pearl Harbor helped. Like in one battle, it basically um said like battleships are useless here. Um like we now need carriers, and we need as many of them as we can get, and every other ship is just protection for that carrier. And and I think the book talked about this, the sinking of the Prince of Wales battleship. Like that was the pride of the British Navy. In fact, I think it helped hunt down the German battleship, the Bismarck, when when during the Atlantic campaign. And then they sent it to the Pacific, and it sank in 15 minutes. So I think this battle was the battle that like made aircraft carriers so important, because it was the first one where it was mainly just carriers.
Absolutely. And great point. And I isn't that crazy? Like just thinking about this battleship that was so dominant in the Atlantic against the Germans, but when planes are now involved with the Japanese tactics that were really new at that time, 15 minutes didn't, we just had no defense. They didn't have planes in the air. They didn't have, or at least enough to, there was no defense that they could stop it. It's crazy. Crazy how it all changed. Um, Absolutely. Thank you. Harrison, go ahead.
Well, I was interested in how like the Japanese were super disciplined in bombing our the Lexington. They came uh, in like trying to find the right word. They just 10 of their bombs uh were dropped, and 5 of them hit. As of instead of America, like one bomb out of 10 hit their aircraft carrier. It doesn't matter if you have 100 bullets if you don't know how to shoot, right? So I think it was definitely um, a time where we learned that we needed to be a bit more exact in our attacks.
Absolutely. And they were good pilots. They had a lot of experience. They had been doing this for months. And so they sort of had this coordinated attack all planned out. They knew how to carry it out. They knew what to do. They knew, I mean, they just had the experience, right? And the Americans didn't. We tried to coordinate our attacks. Sometimes they weren't that effective. I mean, I have it here. Coordination and timing determine success. The Japanese had it figured out. The Americans needed the Battle of the Coral Sea to realize this. Um, that when you have all of these different planes doing different things, they needed to work together. And the book calls it, I mean, they called it an anvil attack, where you have the torpedo bombers doing one thing at the same time the dive bombers are doing another, while you have the fighters that are providing cover for all of this happening, right? And by doing this anvil attack, it's sort of you're putting the ship right in the hammer's way so that the hammer can come down, and when you're dropping 10 bombs, you're landing five or six of them instead of one, maybe. And so by doing this anvil attack, the ships could not then turn and try and outrun the torpedoes, or they couldn't avoid the torpedo bombers, because doing so would then open them up for the dive bombers, and became this super important strategy to have all of this coordination and timing down, because we saw how it worked well for the Japanese and how we were struggling with it. And I think figured it out when we sunk one of their aircraft carriers and sort of solidified that need. Excellent comment.
So there's one more thing.
Sure.
I thought it was interesting that the Japanese sent out planes, did a great raid, and then lost a third of their planes because they couldn't find the carrier. I think that was same with the U.S. If you're gonna lose 10 planes every raid you go out on, the raids are not worth it, especially if you're getting attacked by enemy zeros.
Right. And you're not landing any bombs in the process like that. You're just like, yeah, not great things were happening with all of that going on for both sides. But it is crazy, and it is interesting. I mean, Amy, I think, said it in the few of the favorite things, that at one point the Japanese and the American carriers came within 70 miles of each other, and they didn't even know it. They were just sort of like going in circles around each other. And it's interesting to think how far the technology has come, she said. And I totally agree. It's crazy that with today's technology, I mean, I was talking to a pilot last week. We were playing, he's one of the dads that came on this trip, and he's a pilot, and he flew for the Air Force. And I was just asking him about some of the technologies that we have now in planes. And he said when he was flying in Alaska, he knew what planes in Russia and Japan and China were doing. Like they had the intel to know when planes are taking off in another country on the other side of the world, and when they're doing different things. Like they just know where everyone is all the time, it sounds like. And so it's just crazy to see that they were 70 miles apart, totally within striking distance, multiple strikes, and couldn't find each other. But yeah, and to not be able to find your own aircraft carrier to get back to it is just seems like a blunder that just shouldn't happen. And it's crazy that it did. Great points. Thank you, Harrison. Lincoln, go ahead.
I think that another thing that Coral Sea showed was that don't always trust your reconnaissance and don't act on it immediately until you can get kind of a confirmation. Because as we've already said, there was multiple times where both sides sent out their a full strike thinking, "Oh, sweet, we're gonna go blow up everyone," and then found like two ships that they weren't even wanting. Um, I think it also shows the importance of anti-aircraft fire because, as they point out in the video on Coral Sea that you posted, the Japanese almost had nothing going up, and thus relied heavily on their fighters to um, sorry, I lost my train of thought. To provide cover for the aircraft carriers, while the Americans had their fighters and their AA batteries doing stuff. which made it so they once their fighters improved, their carriers were very hard to reach and get. And it also shows how radar is important and how refining radar gives an important advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll see that radar comes, it plays a huge role moving forward. When we know planes are coming and there aren't surprises, we can be ready to accept them when they're coming at us. And we've talked about it too. Excellent points. Owen, last point, and then we'll move on to the next slide. Go ahead.
I just want to add one last thing. Like, I think the Americans during this battle demonstrated really good flexibility because they sent their dauntlesses out as patrol as their cap, and so to strengthen their cap, and then they could send, which then freed up their wildcats to go support the other dauntlesses and devastators in the attacks. And it also, like, because the aircraft carriers carry like 36 dive bombers, that increases, like, when the Japanese planes came to attack the carriers, they were swarmed by thousands, like, well, not thousands, but dozens of fighters because they used all these dauntlesses to support their air defense. And then, of course, the carriers had superior anti-aircraft support as well, which also helped them a lot.
Absolutely. Yeah, excellent points. I think that the Battle of the Coral Sea was a great learning opportunity for the American forces to figure out what was working, what needed improvement, and how to use that better in the future. And we'll see that it comes together nicely. Well, for the most part at Midway. There are still some coordination and timing faux pas that happen that I think result in unnecessary losses. But the takeaway from the Battle of the Coral Sea that they are able to use and implement moving forward is really helpful. So I wanted to just in the final few minutes of class, a few of my favorite things. We've talked about a lot of these. What were some of the things that stood out to you that you liked from this, from the chapters we read? Owen, go ahead.
Um, I can't remember if this was in the week's reading, but when it was talking about the code breakers, and since we read the Code Girls book, I'm like, I they don't seem to mention those girls, and it's like, I wonder how they played into this.
Yeah, I thought that too. And I looked up when the Code Girls book was written and when this was written. And this was written before the Code Girls book. And so I wonder how much the author of the Code Girls book uncovered about these stories and about the heroines in the story, because I feel like they were a big part of this. They were, I mean, Craig Simons in this book, The Battle of Midway, is talking about sort of the leaders of the groups of code breakers, right? And so we don't get into the individual stories. And so it would have been nice, I think, just a sentence or two to talk about the unconventional teams that were put together. Someone said, I thought it was funny how everyone thought Rochefort was so eccentric, but he was just wearing his robe and slippers because it was so cold in that under like the dungeon that they were working in. I thought that was kind of funny about the code breakers. But yeah, I thought that was interesting too, Owen, that there wasn't a mention of it. I think there should have been, in my opinion. Lincoln, go ahead.
I thought it was interesting seeing the reaction of other veterans to their experiences when they mentioned it in the Doolittle Raid video, and just learning about uh, how people who lived through this stuff uh, felt about it and uh how open they were about sharing stories. I thought that was just an interesting thing to hear about.
Absolutely. I love stories and I love the story aspect of it. And um, Macy's comment is not on the slide, but she talked about the example of the well thought of foreign policy communication between China and America, the camaraderie that developed from the children of the Doolittle Raiders and the children of the people who helped them. I thought was really an interesting insight and something too about the story, right? Just how that friendship, that camaraderie, that bond didn't end then. And so, sharing the story from the parents who were involved to the kids, and then the kids developing this bond from it too, I thought was really cool aspect of the story that I didn't know about until I saw the supplemental content. But neat, it's neat stuff. Anything else from our readings this week that stood out to you? No. All right. Well, next week is going to be exciting. As I mentioned, chapters 9 through 12 of the Battle of Midway. We actually get to Midway now, and the author starts taking us sort of step by step following the timeline. You'll notice as the chapters, the chapter headings and titles are different times of the day, what's happening on each side. And he does a really good job of breaking down what was happening at Midway, what was happening with the Kido Butai, what was happening with the American Task Force, and sort of keeping it all together so that we can understand everyone's role and where they were and different things that were happening. It's pretty exciting. The intensity of the book and the pace of the book really picks up. So as I mentioned at the beginning of class, I try to keep my homework at 4 hours. The reading this week should take, I mean, if you follow the 1.0 speed on Audible, it will take about 4 hours to read. If I post supplemental content, and I probably will, it will be optional. So don't feel like you have to get through the 4 hours for the 4 chapters of the book and the supplemental content. Prioritize the reading first. That's what we'll be talking about next week. Supplemental content just sort of fills in the gap. So as you're looking at your homework for next week, focus first on the chapters of the book, and then if you want to take a break from other things to watch supplemental content, go ahead and do that too. But that's it for this week, you guys. Thanks for a great class. Thank you, as always, for bringing your A game. I love the discussions we have. I really appreciate the insights that you have. It's so fun to talk about these things with you guys and to learn from the things that you're picking up from these stories. I really appreciate it. But that's it. Have a great rest of your week. We'll see you guys next time. Have a good one.
Thank you.